Hello everyone, it's Matthew Lindsay here from Delaney and Associates. Thanks for tuning into the webinar recording of the session that we hosted on October 30th in partnership with Providence Healthcare. Our apologies in advance. We did have some technical difficulties getting a hold of the video, and in doing so we lost the first part of the webinar. So this is kind of a recap of some of the first slides and isn't an actual recording from the webinar. However, I will walk you through some of these first slides, and then the video will merge to where we were able to recover the video and start discussing the culture of consultation matrix. So the webinar was hosted by Delaney and Associates, again in partnership with Providence Healthcare. Delaney and Associates is a full-service engagement company. We are co-located in Ottawa and Vancouver, and we focus primarily on doing engagement in health, local and federal government, education, transportation, and environment. Essentially, our mission is to support more and better community and stakeholder engagement, and we do this by doing engagement needs analysis, planning, design and facilitation, as well as capacity building such as training and developing policies and procedures to help organizations move ahead with their engagements. This was just a quick overview of our webinar procedures, not particularly relevant for this recording, and how to participate. We're really pleased to announce that we did get some interest. We did get interest mainly from folks in the healthcare sector, but we also had some interest from community associations, architects, consulting firms, municipal government, provincial government, and transportation authorities. So those were the people who were listening in on the webinar. You might recall, for those of you who registered for the session, we did a quick registration poll just to get a sense of what you wanted to get out of the webinar, and here's what we heard, just in terms of priority themes and some barriers that you face currently when trying to move ahead with your engagement projects. Point number 2, planning implementation tools and techniques. We did get some people expressing interest about wanting to learn specific engagement techniques. This particular webinar didn't really go into specific engagement techniques, but more focused on the planning, the evaluation tool to help guide planning efforts and help you get into a place where you can ultimately figure out what your engagement objectives are, and then find the best techniques to align to those objectives. This was our agenda for the webinar. You'll notice that we did have various Q&A opportunities and open dialogue opportunities scattered throughout, and those are in the recording that will follow. So now I'm just going to walk you through some background slides that our friends at Providence Healthcare presented as a part of the presentation. So the objectives of the webinar were to showcase the work being done by Providence Healthcare in Ontario using the IEP2 core principles and the Delaney and Associates cultural assessment tool to facilitate conversation between like-minded engagement specialists and enthusiasts who are listening in, and to share best practices and approaches that can assist the like-minded engagement professionals in attendance, but to also create a platform for ongoing discussions concerning best practices in engagement. And so if you go to the Delaney and Associates website under the blog section, you'll see a quick follow-up blog that we did after this webinar, just going through some of the questions that were asked throughout the session and just providing some more detailed answers there for you. And this is where Providence will pick up in the video. This is where we were able to recapture the video in light of some technical difficulties. So at this point, we will merge this video to where we started up with Providence. Once again, we do apologize for the technical difficulties that we've experienced. However, if you do take a look at our blog as well, you'll find that there's a comprehensive list of questions and answers that were asked throughout the session. And also, if you would like someone from Delaney & Associates to get in touch with you, or you would like to get in touch with somebody at Delaney & Associates to speak about your engagement project, please visit www.rmdelaney.com, and you'll find our contact information there. Thanks very much again for those who tuned into the webinar, and we hope to see you all again.
Collaborate those different columns as engagement strategies. So, and I just wanted to provide a brief example of how we've been using this. So over the past year, we've had a few projects where we've had community engagement entrenched directly into them. The first project that I'm going to mention, we knew had to happen. It was creating a smoke-free environment for our entire property here at Providence Healthcare, as mandated by the government. It takes effect for the entire province on January the 1st. So we started this process in the spring, and we actually went live with it on August the 1st. We had advisors on our project team having their say in how best for us to roll this out, and whether it would include our long-term care home, which falls under a separate act. So that was one form of engagement. A second project included capital planning for our houses of Providence, where we would be allocating the funds. We had representation at the table from family members on this committee, as well as one of the residents that live there. Another example is our wayfinding initiative. Again, we had a number of advisors on this group working under the collaborate and empower side of the spectrum. So this is where they were making the recommendations, and we were implementing what they suggested. And just to take 1 second to give you a for instance, we have washrooms out at the front of our hospital. And for the longest time, the indicator of whether it was occupied or not was a light above the door that would, turn on or turn off. The thing is, it was on a time-sensitive, just a monitor. A timer. So what would happen is someone would go into the washroom, and if they were in there longer than the timer, the light would turn off, and you would have patients trying to get in stuff. The other thing we had to take into consideration was that a lot of our patients are in wheelchairs, or they are using walkers. They're not looking up to see whether there's a light on or a light off. As part of this wayfinding initiative, we had one patient that came forward and put forth the idea, why don't you change the locks so it works like on an airplane, green for open, red for occupied, and have it there at the level that the person is looking at. So it was a very simple suggestion. It was something that we had actually never thought about doing, and it took one of our advisors to come forward and say, hey guys, this is what you need to do. And that's how we actually harnessed it and moved forward with it. So to go to the next slide. And this is just another visual we wanted to share with you. We created this for staff to reference as they move forward with their projects. It just gives them an idea as they're moving forward, touch points along the way where they should be engaging and making sure that they do have the advisors' involvement throughout the whole process. And I think on that note, I'm going to turn this slide over to Richard to walk us through.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks, Patty. Now I'm actually going to have to play catch up because I am not on that on that slide. So we're moving through the presentation very crisply. So okay, sorry about that, folks. So this slide is a matrix of 10 elements that people can evaluate to determine the level of capacity that their organization has to enable them on an ongoing way to engage consistently with their stakeholder community. Now, don't worry if you can't read it all. I'm going to break it down over the next 2 slides. And my little interjection here is really only for a couple of minutes to give you a flavor of one of the tools that Providence used to take stock and also to measure their progress as they go on. So in terms of the structure of the matrix, and I should say this is just the back end. This particular evaluation is done online, and it's done by a number of people across the organization, and the results are averaged. And that average represents a score out of 100, so it's a percentage of capacity that you have to do ongoing authentic engagement. So to show you the elements of the matrix on the top, there are 5 strategic elements, and that's on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, there are 5 social elements. Down the side, you can see there, on the left-hand side, you can see there are scores. And so as you progress through the development or evolution of your engagement infrastructure and you add more and more elements to it, like a policy or a champion or guidance or whatever it is, then you accumulate a higher score. Now you can see down at the bottom, the second row from the bottom, there are weights. So not every element of your engagement infrastructure is as important as the next one. So those weights indicate which of the elements are most important. So by having a score for each one of the elements of your infrastructure and by knowing which is the most important, you can actually develop your infrastructure in a strategic way. Now this was developed back, the development of this matrix started back in 2012, and in 2014 it was presented at an IEP2 conference, and so peer reviewed there. And then later in the year, that was, the first one was a Wild Rose conference in Alberta, in Edmonton actually, and then the second one was an IEP2 Ontario chapter in Toronto, and it was peer reviewed again there as an element of that conference. And so we have a fair degree of certainty around the scores and around the elements of it. So the idea being that you do assessments in each element across these 10 different areas, and you arrive at a particular score. So just to give you a sense of what the strategic elements are, so we're looking at things like, are there defined accountabilities within your organization? Is there a policy or procedural guidance? Do you have a strategic approach? Is there any online engagement capacity? And do you evaluate for results? In terms of the social dimension, because organizations are made up of people, and this is a very sort of human-centric business function. And so we need to keep our eye on those elements that people come to expect in order to be engaged in an authentic way. So we're looking at the people both externally and internally, obviously. So internally, for example, is there a tradition of engagement, and do we celebrate our successes? And almost more importantly, do we celebrate our failures in the sense that we put them under the microscope and we learn from them, we don't run away from them? Is there an organizational champion? Is there a competency framework? And through that framework, is there learning that happens? Is there follow-up with participants? And do we have linkages to our kind of media relations and our public relations for the communication elements of our engagement protocols? So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what the framework looks like. And with that, I'm actually going to turn my slide, my screen back over to Noreen. Go ahead.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Okay.
All right,
Matt,
so I'll just continue on from where Richard was saying.
Yeah, Matt, if you can switch screens, I seem to be having a little bit of trouble here. Getting my screen, I can stop sharing it, but I can't turn it over to Noreen.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
All right, go for it.
Yep, everything's perfect. Thank you so much, Matthew and Richard. So just to continue on what Richard was saying in terms of evaluating community engagement, this is really where we started to tie in strategy and uptake. The IAP2 was used really to baseline our capacity and to undertake authentic community engagement. It's really been our constant tool to help guide us, especially with our engagement infrastructure, and help us develop our strategy for a cultural shift. Essentially, this matrix is our assessment tool, which was developed by Richard Delaney, and a lot of other additional international associations are using it, who really want to just seek to advance the practice of public participation in relation to individuals, governments, entities, and other institutions. So for Providence, this really is our soundboard. It's something that we've continuously used year after year, especially with Providence and with the CE plan being a 5-year framework. It's used really to measure our engagement infrastructure on the premise really that it's hard to really define and measure the uptake of community engagement. It's not, community engagement is non-linear itself, but more so this IAP2 building a culture of consultation matrix, it enables us to be held accountable, just how Richard was mentioning, do we run away from things, or are we putting ourselves underneath the microscope in order to better ourselves and in order to better out yearly targets for growth, which you can see have come to fruition. So, we started off, let me see if I can get this. We started off with 16% in 2013. And then we moved over to 34% in 2015-16. We moved over to an increased growth of 43% in 2016-17. And we're hoping really to get an uptake of 52% for 2017-18. We have yet to still score the 2017-18 matrix. That's why it is in an asterisk. But what you can see and what's really been identified here is we have a steady growth. It's about, making sure that community engagement is penetrated and infiltrated within the organization, but at the same time we're held accountable and that we can see that steady growth in order to meet our big dot. And like you can see here, it's growing. It's something that we believe that will be possible, and our 2020 target that we have set for community engagement here at Providence is at 70%. So in terms of, our key findings and what we've learned to date, this is just really highlighting a snapshot of what we've learned, what we've come across, and things to keep in mind as we move forward. When you focus on the what's in it for me with staff, it's really about sharing information that resonates with staff and highlighting champions who are embracing community engagement across the organization. You always want to make sure that you're being clear on the value and that you want to continue building capacity for engagement on all levels. It's more so about the voice of the customer that drives our operational strategies and our operational decisions. And in essence, all quality improvement frameworks really build on this approach. In terms of creating staff buzz, this is where you can kind of get creative with your approaches and exactly how you want to do it. But whether you do it informally and formally, we're working with a canvas here that's organically growing, and it's, very well dynamic in nature. You always want to envision the desired end state to influence change. For me personally, that's what's worked when I've gone and spoken to, different staff members, right, Patty? And, building in that vision and getting that influence and getting that partnership established. And at the same time, we've been given the confidence to continue to pave the way forward as we've had senior leadership encouragement from different departments. And, soliciting information and input from our patients and our community in order to hold us accountable, achievable, and aligned with our big goal. You want to really develop approaches that impact your community through direct interactions. So, the saying, the board to the ward, well, you really have to live and breathe that if that's something that you want to do. Shared responsibility and continuous involvement is key in building community engagement and growing that in your own organizations. And we've also discovered two themes, patients as partners and experts in their experience are really going to drive this forward. In terms of enabling champions throughout the organization, we've identified staff champions in different areas where community engagement could really actively and naturally occur. It's not really, something that we want to make work for our staff members, but it's more so encouraging that, we're doing it informally. Let's just formalize the approach and take a really good approach to it moving forward. So the staff champions and the departments that we've identified is our Human Resources Department, our Infection Prevention and Control Department, known as IPAC, our Food and Nutrition Services Department, as well as our Building Services Department. This is where you really want to look to your organization and identify areas that are high in traffic. And what was really nice when Patty and I went to go speak to these different members and staff members within these organizations is that they've already done community engagement. With our non-smoking plan and building services, one of our staff members, the lead actually in our staff members, actually created a task force and had a smoker, a non-smoker, a resident, as well as a couple people from the community in our hospital to really drive local change and bring all of the opinions to the table forward. In our interview with our human resources and our interview panels, we are really getting a lot more advisor and our partner membership on board and that visibility. So it's really just looking to your organizations, speaking with your executive sponsors and senior leaderships, and really seeing what channels you can move through in order to really highlight community engagement. You have to live your values and share common ideals. I think this is really common sense here. You want to make sure that you have inclusivity. You want to make sure that there's community ownership. You want to make sure that you have an upstream approach, because that is really what community engagement is. And you want to make sure that you do that with social justice and equity. And those are just two of our core values, especially social justice, that we here live and breathe by at Providence Healthcare. In terms of other lessons that we've learned to date, we know that community engagement is something that is happening, and that's something that's really becoming, on a global scale. We're not doing this alone, and we're looking to leaders in the community to learn from their successes, as well as, to learn where else we can discover improvements and really move forward with our plan. We've gone on site visits, we've gone to several conferences, we've connected with email and phone to learn about best practices, having this opportunity really here today with Richard Delaney and associates in terms of where we had formal IAP true training, which Patty had. And he really helped guide us forward in terms of how to really sustain community engagement and make sure that we are held accountable using that culture of consultation matrix. Mm-hmm. And community engagement, really, it's an ever-growing field, and we're committed to continue our learnings, to embed the positive key takeaways, as well as establish it and reach our big goal. So in essence, really, community engagement is multiple conversations often. It is long-term. You have to be vested. It is relationship building when decisions are not required. It's building trust and also being transparent. I'd just like to see if there are any questions that anybody may have. I don't know, Matthew, if you've been moderating and keeping track. I'll just wait a second to see if there are. Otherwise, I will continue moving forward if that's okay.
Hello?
Hi.
I don't know if you can hear me. I do have a question. And it was just kind of where Patty was talking about a little bit ago, starting the process from the ground up in year one. And just wondering if you can elaborate a bit on that, because I'm in a local government environment, and that it would be where we're at from the ground up. So what did that look like for you? How did you kind of break that down, get it off the ground, and who was involved? I'm just really curious how you approached that. Thank you.
Sure. Great question. I pulled out my hair a lot. No, to be truthful, like I was referencing, it was under our strategy, so it was one of the main components to build out this plan. So Maggie Bruno, who's our Chief Nurse Executive and VP of Partnerships, was tasked with this as part of her portfolio, and she came to my department and asked my boss at the time if I could help spearhead this. And I joined another woman who's no longer with us, who was the director of organizational effectiveness at the time. And we started researching. We started looking up and checking out. Actually, it's funny that we're on this slide, because if you look to the right of the slide, some of the organizations that we referenced, we started talking to people. I went through the Richard's IEP2 training to understand a lot more about community engagement, what it was, how we could harness it in a healthcare organization. And from there, we started to invite people to the table. And as I mentioned, we had some advisors there at the table, as well as representation from different areas of our hospital. And basically, it was a roundtable. We would come to a meeting. We'd start off initially just talking about high level what community engagement looked like to us, or what we thought it would look like to us here at Providence. We started to do more and more research on it. And then we got down into the nitty-gritty of it, which was starting to build out a plan and framework for it. And truthfully, it was just a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, a lot of engagement along the way, not just with the people there at the table, but going forth and bringing it to our senior management team to make sure that we had the necessary buy-in from them to move forward with this. And we talked to staff, we talked with other patients, other family members. We shopped it around just to start talking to people and introduce this concept, because I'll be honest with you, this was a real shift for our organization as a whole. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but does that help?
Yeah, that's actually awesome. And if you could just, how much time did that kind of take? That you said a lot of conversations and just really trying to get that cultural shift. How much time did you spend on that?
I think what we'll do is, hopefully you did hear that, and if there is, further questions, or if you'd like to speak more about this, then there will be a chance to move along at the end of it.
Oh, there. Oh, we got a yes. We got a yes.
Great.
Good. Thank you.
So I'll just move on with the presentation for the interest of time. I guess we answered a question, and there'll be more opportunity at the end, hopefully, for open dialogue. So just speaking a little bit on the barriers, I know this was something that was identified from the pre-polling questions that Matthew had sent out and asked you guys. So I think for us, really, I don't ever want to position it as barriers. I think it's more just opportunities where we can learn and be mindful of. And I think time is one of them. And I think this goes to say for any, in any direction, any department, in any organization, and whether you're coming at it from, a provincial perspective, a federal perspective, whether you're working in a government or non, it's really just about time and in terms of how you tackle it. So the nice thing about Providence and, where we are today is I'm a full-time community engagement process lead. So I am the staff liaison. I wear several different hats, and I communicate, and I am the bridge between our patients and our community, who is comprised of our, patients, residents, clients, family members, caregivers, and staff. And in terms of time, like I said, community engagement, it's going to take some time for us to finally get on board with where we're going and that it's here. And it certainly is a culture shift. But I think if you look at channels and if you look towards where you can kind of set in those key messages, and even if it's planting in 3 to 5 messages of what's in it for me, you're better far off than going and speaking to it, solo, to someone maybe solely, or, to speaking to a person one-on-one. So I've kind of been creative with the way I've gotten myself on agendas. I've been on business agenda meetings. I've spoken to our leadership forum platform, which is in essence, Patty, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's all of our senior leaders in different areas of the organization. And I believe there's about 80 of them, including all the directors in different departments. And it's really, promoting the message of what community engagement is. It's not something that's, make worked. It's something that's expected here. It's something that is bringing both perspectives forward. And as the process lead, it's really my opportunity to come together and link a staff member with an advisor and really carry on that time forward so that they can rely on me in order to complete the project, as well as come to me for any first point of contact concerns. In terms of resources, I'm going to speak to this really from a people perspective. Going on a lot of conferences and a lot of site visits with other organizations and hospitals, they really, really stress the importance of diversity. So in terms of resources and diversity, you want to always make sure that you catch your catchment area, but at the same time, you're identifying the gaps that you're missing in terms of, skill sets, experiences, ethnicities, backgrounds. So you really want to make sure that you're capturing your community at large, and you're not really avoiding the fact that, someone that may be from a different socioeconomic status doesn't get to participate. So we all want to be mindful of social determinants of health, which is gender, age, education, class, whether or not they're immigrants or whether or not they're a permanent or Canadian citizen. So really want to hone in on the concept of diversity and making sure that you receive all the perspectives of the different areas and different populations that you serve. In terms of competing initiatives and engagement fatigue, that is something that is, it does occur and it does happen. And the concept of community is difficult. But I think the one thing that we've learned to date really is defining what community engagement is for you and for your organization, which Patty did define and identify at the beginning. And I think it's really about striking a balance between local needs and public goods. There is an expectation that the hospital has to make money and serve itself, but on the other hand, you have to also be transparent and accountable to the people that you serve. So it's really just striking that good balance between what the priorities are in both perspectives and really highlighting them and bringing them together moving forward. Community engagement really is about better planning outcomes and allowing the voices of those we serve really guide our implementation. And that really goes back to our big dot here at Providence Healthcare. And too often, engagement activity is about managing expectations and securing consent for development proposals. But I think we have to just shift our mindset and work with the communities to achieve better planning outcomes. So these are, three things that I've identified that are ongoing. It's not that it can't be mitigated, but it's really just honing in on what is our end goal at the end of the day, and how can we as Providence Healthcare employees and staff members and a community at large really support our patient population and drive better local needs and better health outcomes. In terms of for the organization, so this is really just 3 areas that I wanted to touch upon. As Patty did mention, we are in year 3 of our community engagement plan and framework. And as we enter our, our 3rd quarter of our year, we really have honed in on three areas or 3 themes, 3 tools, I want to say even, that I've held closely and near and dear to my heart. These are 3 ideals. It's quality and co-producing value. You want to make sure anything that you do is, qualitatively is producing quality and co-producing. So we're really moving towards an approach of co-producing and a coaching model, and really collaborating with our patients, our residents, our clients, our family members, and our caregivers in the work that we're doing. We have a community engagement steering committee that is comprised of staff members in different areas, as well as former patients. And one of the themes that we identified that we recognized very quickly is that it has to be more advisor representative. It has to be, ultimately, if we're going to serve our patient and our population, it has to come from the voices of them. So it really has to be top heavy on that end. You always want to make sure that you engage versus intervening. Engaging is, a dual conversation. It's having 2 parties present, and it's coming up with a solution together. You're not always coming to the rescue of intervening from an organizational perspective, but you're really taking into consideration, what does the other party have in mind? What makes sense to them? We can do everything under the sun and moon in terms of advancing policies and protocols and rules and regulations, but it has to come from the people that are experiencing it. And that's when I think community engagement really comes in hand. And the other lesson that we've learned, or the ideal really, is partnership, networks, and alliances. Partnerships amongst each other as staff, and just making sure that we remain committed to the end goal. Networks, so with our new health network with St. Michael's and St. Joseph's, we're creating, a new foundation, and we're learning from each other, and we're learning best practices. And I think this is really good here, and it's always good to be open, transparent, curious to learn, and creating alliances, creating that partnership with our patients, with our hopefully new attendees that are here logging on to this webinar and listening to us. And, being open and being vulnerable and looking for change and looking to really grow and asking for help when you need it, and looking to other organizations that have practiced community engagement for a lot longer and taking their values and their practices and really molding it into Providence in terms of our culture and our community. So I think I'll just move on to the next slide. What's next? So we've been pretty busy over the past 3 years, but in our 3rd year specifically, these are some of the highlights that we have done by community engagement. So we have integrated our Patient and Family Advisory Council. So we look towards, harnessing experiences and really harnessing what each member brings in terms of an advisor capacity, and really leveraging that in order to have our advisors, who are former patients, residents, clients, family members, caregivers, really look to other opportunities of engagement and get more involved should they want to. We now have a balanced scorecard present. So, before community engagement even started, we were not on the balanced scorecard, but this year is our 1st year that we are making a presence, and we do have an indicator identified.
And that was actually one of the reasons we chose the building a consultation matrix that you saw earlier, was because we were challenged by our board and by our senior team on how we were actually going to measure community engagement. So just to add that in there for you.
And like I mentioned earlier, we are connecting with our new health network. In addition, we are marketing, educating, and supporting our advisors and staff. So like I said, we do recognize this is a culture shift, and we're more so, hand-holding our staff as well as our advisors and letting them know that they're not alone. And, going back to the slide that Patty mentioned on our journey to date, I don't know if you saw with our plan and framework, but there was a small icon of 3 different manuals that we created. So in year 2, we created an onboarding manual, we created an education manual for staff and advisors, and we did create a toolkit manual for staff. When the time comes that they did want to engage in community engagement, they weren't left alone. They had the necessary tools and techniques in order to become a project lead and to do so confidently and comfortably, and at the same time have a vast amount of different resources available that they can consult depending on the level of engagement activity that they had. So there were, tips and tool sheets on how to conduct focus groups and how to have open space meetings and world cafes and such. In addition, we are now involving advisors in key leadership interviews. So we have a human resources panel, and depending on the candidacy and the role of the position, they do ask for advisor representation. We are also creating a community engagement internal and external webpage presence. So Patty is really the expert in this, and she's building out a internal landing webpage for staff members to go to learn more about community engagement, to provide some resources or in the news on why to do community engagement and how to do it successfully. At the same time, she's also driving local traffic to our intranet platform to request an advisor and to have them present on one of their initiatives or projects should it come up. We are also introducing a database and e-request form. So in order to track our advisors and the hours that they are engaging with us and their demographic information and their background and their strong suits, we really want to collect all of this data and use it as metrics for process and outcome metrics. So we're currently working with our ICT department to get a database and track all of the engagement hours. And we are growing our community. I'm happy to say that we initially started with, I think, 4 to 5 advisors, and now we have about 15 advisors. So we're growing our community informally at Providence and formally. We did so by having a community engagement open house just about 2 weeks ago, where we invited anyone that was potentially interested in becoming an advisor, as well as our volunteer services. Some of those folks came over to our community engagement open house. And I did a little staff roadshow that I can speak more to later on, or, you know, that I'm happy to answer questions with if you wanted to learn more about that. But just creating that buzz and creating that presence and knowing that community engagement is here to stay. It's part of our strategic plan. It is the way moving forward, and making sure that in order, you know, to really uphold the person-centered care, you have to live it and breathe it. I think this does conclude, and we are at the end of the presentation. So in the interest of time.
There was a question.
Oh, okay. I'll just like to ask Matthew to come on board just to help moderate the Q&A period.
Well, actually, I was keeping track of some of the questions there. So I'm going to ask that follow-up question on behalf of Tammy, and then I'm going to go straight to the wrap-up because we only have about 3 minutes left. But Tammy's question was around, you know, how much time, it was a follow-up that maybe you didn't hear, how much time did it take from the time that you really made a commitment to building out a really robust program to the place you are now? And you went through some of the things that you had done, but what lessons did you learn in terms of what could you have done differently to accelerate that process?
Well, I can say that that's a great question, number one. And what I was actually thinking is we're speaking to you now from year 3. In year 1, when we first started out, even just getting to the point where we put pen to paper, took us, we started in the fall, say around September, we started to meet and to discuss, etc. It was probably February before we actually got to the point where, as a group, we were actually ready to write down our findings and start to create this framework. So that's like that's just like 6 months just trying to get your head around something. And since then, like year 1, we were able to complete the framework. So year 2, it took us the entire year, again, working in individual groups with advisors, etc., to build out an education plan, to build out a toolkit filled with resources that's probably, I think it's about 48 pages long, that we'll be able to put on our intranet for staff to use. And also we had a third group during that time that was building out our onboarding process. So that's like another year doing that. And here we are in year 3, where we're actually, I find that we've gone from development all of a sudden to we are implementing, we are operationalizing this program and starting to move where we're seeing people come on board. We're able to test out these tools that we have created, not knowing if they would work or not, you know, if we have to improve on them and where to improve on them, etc. So to be honest, to Tammy's question, I want anybody on the line that is just starting out on this to realize that 3 years ago, we were all in the same place where we were sitting there going, what is community engagement? How are we going to have this work in our organization, to today where we're actually rolling it out, but we are by far not done to the level of capacity that we're striving for. So I don't know if that helps with the answer there, Tammy, but I'm more than willing to follow up with any questions after this as well. Lose Richard.
Richard, are you there?
Yeah, I'd just like to take the time now to thank you once again for taking the time to develop this presentation, to think about what other people would be interested in knowing about your journey, and really making a commitment to share this information with folks. Because I know you spent a significant amount of time on it, we would like to know from the participants a little bit about their experience. There will be time for questions afterwards if people want to hang on the line, but we would specifically like to know, when Matthew sends that evaluation, there's one question there about, you know, how did we do? We'd like to know things like the pace of the information presented, the nature of the information that was presented, ease of access, that kind of thing. Also, in terms of follow-up, there are some questions that came in that we didn't get a chance to get to, so please participate in the blog. You all have the presentation, so you can promote the presentation or the recording. There will be a mailing list that you can join if you want to find out about more opportunities like this. And even like part of our mission is to really work with our clients to share their best practices across the community, this professional community. So I really want to encourage people to think about what they have to contribute to this field. In terms of Patty and Noreen, again, thank you ever so much for spending the time to do this work and for sharing it with everyone on this webinar. There is the contact information for Patty and Noreen. We're going to stay on the line for a little bit longer. If there are people who have some questions, then by all means, at least Matt and I don't know about Noreen and Patty, we can stay on the line. There was a question about, you refer to it as a community plan and framework.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering why the word patient isn't there.
Great question. One of the things, like I was mentioning when I first went through Providence Healthcare, just a description of who we are. We have a very large community here. We have patients, we have family members, we have caregivers, we have residents that are in our long-term care home, we have clients that are in our adult day program for people with dementia. So we wanted to make sure, and that's just talking about the people here, and that doesn't even include like the neighboring community and our partner organizations outside of Providence Healthcare, like Variety Village, partner sites, etc. So when we talked about that, that did actually come up. Why aren't we calling it, patient engagement, etc.? And we really thought hard and long on it, and we decided to call it community engagement, specifically to ensure that no matter where you fell within the Providence community, you'd be able to see yourself reflected in the work that we're doing here.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. The word patient can be a loaded word, as we've experienced.
Oh, it's very loaded, yeah.
So, Matthew, I'll leave it to you to moderate any questions that have come in to you, or if you want to unmute people who are looking to ask a question directly to Patty or to Noreen. Okay, well, with that, I guess there are no other questions that people have in mind right now, and people are starting to leave the call. So our 1 hour has elapsed, and again, I would just like to thank everybody who's participated in the call today, but especially to Patty and Noreen for taking the time to do the work, to share their lessons learned, and I wish you all the best success going forward. Take care.
Great, thank you, Richard.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Richard
to
and
everyone.
Matthew. And thank you to everybody for attending.
Yep, thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Bye.